Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining our Energy Stewardship webinar series. This is the second in the series. We're delighted to be featuring the Royal Oak First United Methodist Church and with our guest speaker, Bob Prudhomme. People are still joining, and as they're joining, if you would like to put in the chat your name, the congregation you're affiliated with, if any, and anything else you'd like to share, and we'll get started.
Peggy, it's been a minute or two. How have you been?
Good. How have you been?
I'm just delightful.
Awesome. Good to join you. I'm looking forward to what we're gonna hear.
So again, welcome, and Michigan Interfaith Power and Light is delighted to be hosting this as the second in our webinar series. So Leah Wisty, our executive director, and myself both are launching this series as a way to grant exposure to congregations who are doing great work in making their buildings more energy efficient and sustainable. Our mission is to inspire and equip people of faith to be exercise stewardship and love of all creation. We offer practical ways to put faith into action by promoting energy efficiency, renewable energy, and other sustainable practices that lead to a cleaner, healthier, and more just world. A few logistics. So as we're going through the presentation this evening, you might have information that you would like to retain. We will be sending you a link to the recording, and that will be on our website as well, along with the slides. So be on the lookout for that. If you have any questions, please feel free to post them anytime during the presentation in the chat. So you can put them there so that you remember them and we remember to get back with you. During the Q&A, we'll have an opportunity to unmute yourself and ask your question directly to the presenters, and or to use the reactions feature in Zoom. So if you look at all the little icons on the bottom of your Zoom display, there should be one that says reactions, and you can do raise hand. I think that's where that's at, or is that Leah shaking her head? Somewhere there's a feature like that.
There is a reactions button, but there's not a hand raise there. I think that's only in webinars. So folks should just unmute and just jump in when we get to the Q&A part.
There's one online says raise hand.
Well, then you raise your hand, Bob. We will call on you for sure. So, all right, so here's our agenda. We're gonna do a brief poll. Then we'll hear from Bob Prudhomme, the coordinator of Creation Care Ministries at Royal Oak First United Methodist. We'll have time for Q&A, and then we'll do some brief announcements about our upcoming programs, and we'll adjourn by 8 p.m. And thank you so much for joining us on such a beautiful spring evening. So it's with great pleasure that I want to introduce Bob Prudhomme. He's, as I said, the coordinator of Creation Care Ministries with the Royal Oak First United Methodist Church. He is recently called by his creator to pursue ministry. He's in the process of becoming a deacon in the United Methodist tradition. He is also in seminary at Garrett Theological Seminary in Evanston, Illinois, and he's a personal friend and mentor that has inspired me to be involved in sustainability. So it's with great pleasure that I turn this over to you, Bob, and very much look forward to your presentation.
Well, thank you, Jennifer, and thank you, Leah, for hosting this series, and myself included. The work that you're doing at Michigan Interfaith Power and Light, and all Interfaith Power and Lights, is about as important work as can be done within the faith community, in my humble opinion. So I really appreciate that. Let's see now, I'm going to try to share my screen and then turn this thing on, and hopefully it's working for you. Um, I want to start off with a little caveat. My faith tradition is in the Judeo-Christian route, but from what little I know about other faiths around the world, whether it be Islamic, Hindu, Buddhist, Judaism I mentioned, caring for creation is as basic of a charge as we have from our Creator across the globe. So I am sharing to you from my faith tradition, and I just want to read a couple of scriptures here. In the Old Testament, in the Jewish scripture in Genesis, it says, God blessed them and said to them, speaking, of course, of the humans that he created, man and woman, be fertile and multiply, fill the earth and master it. Take charge of the fish of the sea, the birds in the sky, and everything crawling on the ground. And then a couple thousand years later, this fellow named Jesus comes along. And in one of his stories, he says, the thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and to have it abundantly. And depending on which New Testament verse you read or gospel, there's a little bit different take on those. But one of my favorite passages is when Jesus is challenged by a legal scholar. I said, what's the most important command of God? And he said, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment. And the second is just like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. So in my background and belief structure, loving each other, loving all of creation go hand in hand. In the United Methodist, they've developed a book called The Social Principles, and they all come from our actual book of discipline or book of discipleship, depending on how you look to read it. And I've only got 3 quotes here from that, but they are all from the same section, and it's the section on the natural world. All creation is the Lord's, and we are responsible for the ways in which we use and abuse it. We're responsible. And then the second, the whole earth is God's good creation and as such as inherent value. That one is speaking in the section on energy specifically in the natural world. How we use what God has given us is our responsibility. And then in the section on global climate change, we acknowledge the global impact of humanity's disregard for God's creation. And those just, sometimes I wonder, why do we have to keep repeating that? Shouldn't we just know that from birth? I mean, it's common sense, but apparently not. So I read those, so I'm not going to bore you anymore with that. This is a few examples of some of the things that how we care for our creation and each other at Royal Oak First. Outside, you see a food pantry that was actually built by an Eagle Scout for a project. And I have to tell you, people have actually wondered if that has any value. It just got rebuilt because somebody recognized it did. And I can tell you this, I had a friend who's not even a member of our church, but he goes by there on occasion. And he brought some meals, some food, and there were a couple gentlemen standing there, actually sitting there on the step. And they looked at him, and one of them, his eyes welled up with tears. And he said, oh man, I thought we were going to not be able to eat tonight, but it looks like we're going to feast. And so my friend Ian, he went back to the grocery store and refilled it again after they'd taken what he brought. So there is value in caring for each other. We do Sock It To Me September with Noah down at Central United Methodist Church. Every year we've won the Golden Sock Award for the number of socks donated. People living on the streets, one of the biggest needs they have are socks. The Wave Project, some of you might be familiar with, we brought that in particularly during the pandemic so people could wash their clothes, so people could take a shower that didn't have access to those things. And the Love Wins sign down here, this was one of the members of the church got really tired of looking at all the negativity on the news and said, I just need to scream it to somebody. So he went and made this with his wife and put this up. He didn't tell anybody, he just put it up. And of course, nobody asked him to take it down. The bottom 3 screens are all from our food ministry. for people in need of a meal. These are some gals from the church that are making sandwiches 5 days a week, 365, or rather 12 months out of the year. I guess that's 52 weeks. We serve hot lunches for lunch, but if someone can't make it, if they've got a doctor's appointment or somewhere they have to be during the lunch hour, there's always a sack lunch available. The center picture is a group inside when we could actually be inside enjoying lunch. And I think Fred back there, Pastor Bowden, is actually serving the Eucharist on this particular day. One Thursday a month, we offered services for them, was Fred's idea. And then the other picture in the corner over here are a couple of our gentlemen that we've gotten to know pretty well. And one of the women from the church, Mrs. Sleeman, she's just a delight. Everyone there is just such a delight. When it comes to loving your neighbor and loving God, I don't think you can love God without loving your neighbor. And loving your neighbor is an understanding that we have to recognize everyone is our neighbor, whether they're right next door or whether they're on another piece of the planet. We hear a lot of questions when it comes to climate change and sustainability. I love one of the questions I got from one of the elderly women of our church. It says you're in charge of sustainability. What does that mean? You're going to raise money for us? And I had to explain to her what it meant. And she said, oh, Genesis, I know that. And just terminology that is new to some people. I just assumed everyone knew it because I knew it. But I learned that a lot of questions still prevail. And here's just a few of them. I'm not going to try to touch on all of them tonight. I wouldn't have time if we had hours to do that. But, what's the big deal with carbon? What's this greenhouse effect we're always talking about? And how do we know the climate is changing? What's going on in the oceans? There's so much. We could talk for hours on that. What can we do to help? And I think one of the biggest, most important questions we need to be asking ourselves, what do we not know? I stand by the ancient Greek philosopher. This is the smartest and the wisest is the one who knows what he doesn't know. And what is global climate change? I'm going to touch on a few of these, but not all of them in this presentation tonight. I do know this. Everything we do and everything we don't do impacts the earth. And that means it impacts others and all of creation in some way. You should recognize this. This is the Rouge I-75 crossing, Rouge River crossing. And when I first moved here in 1992, I used to try to cross that bridge by holding my breath because I didn't know what was coming out of these smokestacks. This is actually a pretty clean day because there's only a couple smokestacks belching, but I've seen green, yellow, orange, red fire and smoke coming out of these. And as I said, everything we do has an impact, whether we understand it or not. Good stewardship demands, I started to say ask, but it demands that we seek to understand how we're impacting the earth, and by extension, how this affects other people, other life, and all elements of creation. I love this little graphic of this baby because she has no idea what global warming means, but it seems like she's going to learn real quick that the earth is getting hotter, and this is indicative of the Arctic being warming faster than the rest of the planet. This next slide I like to include, I know Jennifer's seen this, but I hear so much about carbon dioxide emissions and people say, well, what about the emerging markets? What about China? What about India? Well, this kind of puts it in perspective here a little bit. The entire country of China does not emit as much global warming CO2 emissions as the United States does. Basically, it's equal to the eastern half of the country plus Texas. You throw in the United Kingdom and Brazil, the rest of the country, and that's what the equivalency is. So we have a responsibility. We have caused more damage than any other society. We have a greater responsibility. I'm going to talk a little bit about the numbers specifically at our church here. And I'm going to put these up, but I'm going to talk about them just a minute before I do. But now I'm just going to go ahead and put them up. Our total construction cost for the renovation plus the new construction was $4.1 million. We got a lighting rebate from DTE Energy. We applied with consumers, but I have to tell you, we had so many problems with our contractors that we couldn't get answers to satisfy consumers, and we had to withdraw the application. And the project they promised us would take 12 months. I told them it was going to take 15 to 18. They thought I was nuts. We started it January 5th, 2016, and they are still working on finishing up the punch list. So that tells you where we're at with the contractors and all. So our HVAC systems cost us about $750,000, a little over $500,000 for new electrical systems. The electrical inspector said when he came and visited our mechanical room, he took one look at the electrical service and said, I can tell you this, you're not going to get a permit to do anything unless you build a new electrical service. So that bumped up the budget right there. We do have a plan for a solar array on the church, and it varies in cost depending on which system and how we do it, between $67,000 and $87,000. But the savings over 25 years is almost $250,000. In my opinion, it's a no-brainer, but you know what to say about opinions. The reason that we have not done it yet is as the project stretched out and kept sucking up more of our finances, which, by the way, we self-financed the entire project. In the 1950s, a group put together an endowment fund for capital improvements on the church, and nobody ever wanted to touch it. And when the building improvement committee looked at that and said, well, why aren't we using this? I said, my God, there are people here have been remodeled more than this building in less time. And then I'm going to show you some before and after energy costs. And before you panic, I'm going to explain to why they're so high. Prior to the construction in the year 2015, the entire year, our electrical bill was $26,670. After we were done with the renovation and the new construction, it went to almost $35,000. I went, my God, that's almost $9,000 more. What did we do wrong? Well, the fact of the matter is, we also went from a small church having 125 to 150 worshipers on the weekend to a large church with almost 500 every weekend. We went from having 3.5 full-time employees. I don't know how you get a half, but to having 17 by 2019. And 2019, by the way, those are the numbers because in 2020, as we know, things are awry. We didn't use the building. We don't think it's reasonable to look at those numbers. Natural gas, we did save money. We went from $19,000 down to a little over $16,000 after the construction was done. Now, one of the other reasons that it's so expensive, because with everything that we put in the building, and this was my charge, I butted a lot of heads with this stuff, but when it came to sustainability and leadership and energy and environmental design, I said, you know, if we don't do these things now, if we don't put Energy Star compliance appliances in, if we don't put LED lighting in and pay more now, we're going to be asking future generations to pay the bill for our lack of tenacity. So using just a basic benchmark, our bills would have been $18,000 a year more than what they are now. I actually got a thank you for one of the people yesterday that when they saw these numbers said, you know, I had no idea. So it makes a difference. We merged with St. John's United Methodist Church in 2005, and there wasn't a lot in the building that could be reused, but one of the things that we did have to reuse were stained glass windows. You remember back in the 70s, the mantra was reduce, reuse, recycle. We use reduce, reuse, recycle, respect, and restore. One of the things that we were able to make use of were these stained glass windows. We have 19 of these that got reused in varying sizes. We had an expert remove them from St. John's, store them until we were ready to install them. And he gave us a value on these a little bit more than $3,400 a window. So there you're looking at $65,000 we saved right there. And I wouldn't say that we saved it, but we wouldn't have these beautiful windows in the chapel, in on the chancel sanctuary, in the sanctuary, and at the new entry on Lafayette Avenue. One of the other reasons our expenses were so high is our building was not air conditioned when we started this. The sanctuary was, the choir room practice down in the basement was, and what we called the small dining room. Those three areas were the only thing that were air conditioned, and there were places in this building in July and August and September that were not usable. So we got 11 new air handling units and air conditioning condensing units installed. That also jumped our electrical and our HVAC budget up. But as I said, they're all Energy Star, and so we'll be saving for a long time. Right out of the gate, the way I see it is we saved $18,000. Another thing that we did was we heard about the rebates. We actually heard about this from Lee and Jennifer and Bob Chapman when he was over at Michigan Interfaith Power and Light. So we wanted to upgrade all of our HVAC equipment and include that on a consumer's application. We had so many problems with them, it just didn't work out. But we did work with a consultant at DTE, and we did most all of this work ourselves. So here's just a few of the things that we were able to accomplish with that. And I included this one that says Retro 500. Can you folks see that?
We sure can, Bob. Yeah.
Okay. We had some questions about whether it was going to show up or not. These LED engines were going in the sanctuary chandeliers that were originally put in the church in 1917. They were certified antiques. And the consultant had never heard of an LED engine, so they didn't understand what this was all about. We had to jump through quite a few hoops with them, but we were able to get it across that it is definitely firing up an LED lamp. The picture directly below that, those are two of the 6 chandeliers that are hanging from the ceiling. They have one downlight, and they have 5 in an array that are for ambient lighting. They needed to be 100% dimmable, and anybody knows anything about LED lighting, you know that you got to check to make sure if you want it to go down to 0 for an effect, you've got to make sure that your light is dimmable to 0. These are, and that was one of the things that we worked on everywhere. The sconces in the lower right-hand corner of your screen, we thought we would just change the little candelabra incandescent fixtures with LED candelabras. But when we looked at one, we saw that it was a nightmare. So kudos to Patrick Calhoun, who took every one of these down, found a vacant room that wasn't being used. It was actually my office at the time, and rebuilt every one of the sconces and put them back up with dimmable LEDs. The picture up above, I include that. Those are all LED lighting, and that's our gathering space. And wherever you see a column there used to be a wall. In fact, there were walls connecting between the columns, between the walls, so that it was such a maze you could not find your way. When the district committee was brought to the church to talk about whether they should allow us to do this work, one of the gentlemen needed to go to the men's room. So we actually escorted him to the men's room. And then after about 15 minutes, we said, gee, you think he found his way back? And he was lost. So we sent a search party out to find him, and he got back to the chair. He says, I don't care what you do. If it means you're taking out all those doggone walls, I'm going to support it. This is just insane. So now when you go in on 320 West 7th Street, which is where this picture is taken from, you can see all the way to the new entry on Lafayette, unobstructed. This is Patrick celebrating the renovation. And I put this at this point in the slideshow because the next one is the solar array, one of the options that we're looking at. This particular array, both arrays that we're looking at are 20 kW arrays. This is we call it our flat roof, although it's got a 212 pitch on it. The long axis runs north and south. This is a little bit lower efficiency. The cost would be just about $67,000 initial cost. In 5 years, it would save us $4,500. In 15 years, $68,000, and in 25 years, $210,000. The reason that we are still looking at this option is because one of the things that our friend Jim suggested was, if we cover that entire roof with solar panels, we might be able to reduce our cooling load on the upper floor over there. So we're going to look at how that's going to be impacted if we go this route. And what you see right here, that's the cooling tower was put in the 80s for the sanctuary building here. Okay, so that's one array possibility. And then this one, you can see this is only a smaller area right here, still a 20 kW array, but it's a much more efficient system. Upfront cost, $85,000 as compared with $67,000. 5-year savings of $6,100, 15 years of $84,000, and in 25 years, a savings of $245,000. Does not include any tax rebates. We're exploring a power purchase agreement, having the church just do it, or putting up a separate LLC, putting it together for someone who needs to do some tax harvesting. And one of the things that the trustees and finance committee was very good about was letting us spend the money up front. This disconnect here is for our rooftop solar in the future. We had the building torn apart. It only made sense to put the conduits and the infrastructure in so we'd have to rip it apart again. And they were very good about letting me do that with technology for cable, lighting, network, all kinds of, who knows what the future is going to bring. But they were willing to pay up front for that. So that's what I've got to share. And I know I went a couple minutes over. I just want to leave you with these. These are 3 of my most favorite books on the subject. And if you really want to know if it works in the industrial world, read Confessions of a Radical Industrialist. Ray Anderson was my favorite people on the planet. He died a few years ago, and he will be long-term missed. You will know Interface if you ever been in a commercial building and had carpet squares in it. He pioneered that whole idea. Everyone said, you can't own the carpet, you got to sell it. You won't make any money. He said, no, we're going to own it, and we're going to take it up and recycle it at the end of its useful life. They pioneered the entire idea, and he was quite successful at it. And Fred Elmore at Keswick United Methodist Church down at the bottom of the screen said that you could feel free to contact him. He did a PPA, a power purchase agreement, with his church up there, and he said he'd be happy to talk with anyone who's interested in doing it at their church. And I think I've run out of time, so I'm sorry I ran over.
Bob, that was great. Thank you so much. That was all really useful information. We want to open it up at this time for any questions that people have. You can either, like we said before, put those questions in the chat, or at this time you can feel free to unmute yourself and just ask Bob directly.
Yes, Dale, go ahead.
I had a question relative to the LED light engine. I wasn't able to read all of what was in there. I gathered there was something about 250 to 500 watt incandescent replacement.
Yes, that's essentially it. The antique fixture would not accept a 500 watt LED light. So it needed this engine that would actually just screw in instead of a light bulb that would then power the LED. So we would still get 500 watts of comparable lighting, although that's the brightness that they're referring to. It uses about 1/10 of that in terms of lighting. I don't know if I'm getting to your question or not, though.
Yes, yeah. So is this engine a ballast, like a ballast, or what?
It's a transformer, I'll call it. I'd say it's a
Okay.
hybrid between a ballast and a transformer. I mean, a ballast is a type of a transformer, but it's a hybrid system. We worked with Advanced Light and Sound up in Troy, and they were great to work with on figuring out these things.
Okay. Do you know where the bulbs came from?
Yes, those came from Advance. The bulbs that we purchased ourselves, and by the way, we did all the LED except for those because they were up so high with members of the church. We had a couple retired electricians and myself who used to play in the electrical field. We got them from P&M Lighting in Ferndale, Michigan.
P&M Lighting?
Yep, stands for Paul and Maurice, two brothers. Great couple of guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Dale. Peggy has put a question in the chat. Peggy's question is, how did you finance the work? And I think you addressed this by talking about the endowment fund, but anything else you want to share?
Well, we actually went to our bank and financed it through them, so we didn't have to pull all the money out at once. They gave us a 1.5% note because we had the capital in the endowment fund, in various funds and what have you. I believe it was started in 1958 was when the folks said, you know, we need to look what the future is going to need for this church. And I said we hadn't spent any of it, but that's not true. Lightning hit the bell tower one time and we had to repair that. But other than that, it was just sitting there gaining interest. And I actually said, you know, at the time I was 60 years old, and I said, I've had more remodeling in my life than this building has in its life. We really need to think about remodeling this place.
Great. I have a question for the attendees. Given what you've just heard from Bob, what kind of information would you need, or what resources to help you implement an energy saving project in your congregation? Are there things about what has Royal Oak First United Methodist Church has done that are an inspiration to you? Are there other projects you have in mind, and what are the kinds of questions that you have for Bob that could help you in implementing a project within your congregation?
So I don't have a specific one because I'm not officially serving a parish at the present time. But it strikes me that the fact that you had that endowment with that vision way back in the 50s that people said someday we're going to need this, is that I wonder if there's a way of using that story for congregations, because I have a hunch there's a lot of congregations that have endowments that are dedicated for improvements and stuff, and to make the case for creation care for utilization of that. I don't have a particular need myself, but I'm just thinking about, that's a lot of money. 4.1 million bucks is a lot of change, but it wasn't like you just got it overnight. It's been developing over several years. Right. And there's a lot of congregations that probably similarly have accumulated lots of money that's just sitting. I mean, I've known when I served as bishop in our denomination, then I know that congregations, they would go for decades and not spend any of that. And to be able to make the case, this may be the time, given the climate crisis, to do kind of what you guys are doing. So it's just an observation, I guess.
Well, actually, that's a great observation, because I have to tell you, when I first started on the building improvement committee here, one of the very first meetings that the trustees and the architect and the building improvement committee and myself were in on, I was making copies, and when I came into the room, one of the trustees was absolutely railing on the idea of sustainability. She says, I know that new guy is all into that, and I know it's just going to cost more money and take more time, so I don't even want to hear about that. And I listened to it for a while, and then when I had an opportunity to respond, I said, you know, you can look at it that way. This church has been here since 1857. Or you can look at it as an investment in your children and your grandchildren and your great grandchildren. For example, if we do the solar array now, it's only around $75,000. And in 25 years, I think you're still going to be here. I plan on being here. It will have paid for itself 3 times over. So are we looking at just expenses, or are we looking at investment? And I think as nonprofits, which is what we are, as a church faith community, we don't think of things as investment. We think of them as expenses, but we need to start looking at them as investments. It's a good point.
Great questions. We just launched a poll to try to get a sense of what type of energy saving projects your congregation is considering. If there have been any discussions amongst your trustee council or members of your congregation, have you identified any project, whether it be lighting, HVAC, solar, or otherwise, that you're considering? We're just interested in what are you thinking about, essentially. So I'm going to just share the results so far, and apologies if you didn't get a chance to participate in the poll but would still like to. But it looks like at least one person's looking at interior lighting, one about exterior lighting, and everyone is looking into solar. Okay, awesome. That's fantastic. Anything of those who responded to the poll that you want to share about the energy saving project you're considering? Jim?
I'll just say, we are gearing up for a capital campaign, and one of the things that may or may not be able to be covered by that, we have a number of maintenance and repair work that needs to be done first, but we've been talking for a number of years of renovating our kitchen, which quite frankly, last year became old enough to qualify for Medicare. And so some Energy Star appliances there would seem to be a natural fit, but that's just sort of out there in the planning stages. The other thing is at some point we will, of course, like most buildings, need to replace a roof. And I would like to hear anything Bob has run into in terms of roof and energy savings from installation there. I will say we took a running look at solar power a couple of years ago, but frankly, I got way too ambitious in looking at it. I was envisioning not only we have a very small part of our roof we could use because so much of the building is a historical building. You couldn't put it there where it could be seen, which was a problem that St. Peter's and Corktown also ran into. And so there's certain places you can put it, other places you can't. So I had this brilliant idea of thinking about solar panels mounted on carports in our parking lot, with the electricity both going to for the building and possibly to charge electric vehicles. Putting in carports is enormously expensive. The cost just went through the roof, and we said, forget this. I think rightfully so at the time. I'll say, if you want to look into it, please do so, but sit down when they give you the price estimates. And as far as putting something on the roof, the Buildings and Grounds Committee said, look, we know we're going to have to replace that roof. You don't want to put solar panels up there and then 3 years later come in and replace the roof. You've got, don't get the cart before the horse on that. So that we'll have to stage those appropriately. But if we could talk some about roofs, I'd be interested in hearing what you have to say. Thank you.
We end up having to replace part of our roof. When we went up on the new addition, we looked over at the roof, and it was part of it is a standing seam. It's on the north side, and it's kind of in the shadows, and we didn't really pay a lot of attention to it. but we looked and it was looking a little rusty. It was standing seam metal. And then we went inside and we noticed that up above the attic in there, there'd been some leakage going on. And so we gingerly stepped up on the roof and we found out that it was saturated with water. It was actually rusting through in places, and you could step with your left foot, and where you're just about to put your right foot, you could see water oozing back up from the insulation that was under it. So it had no insulation value when it was soaked like that. That was another expense that threw us for a loop that we hadn't anticipated with doing an interior renovation. Insulation, I've always been a firm believer that insulation is best put at the place where you need to stop the energy flow. So if you have a roof that faces the south, you want to put it towards the exterior underneath the finished roof to block that heat. If it's on the north, you want to put it closer to the warm side of the building where you want to keep the heat in, because you're not trying to keep the heat out from the sun. So there's a balance there on how you do that throughout a building. And it's actually fun to play with when you think about things like that. But if you're thinking about a roof and a solar array, I would also look at some of the technologies that are being developed where you have integrated solar. Tesla, for one. I can't think of the other company that's actually making solar shingles. Dow worked with solar shingles for a while. They're testing them out on the western part of the country in Colorado and California. But I think integrated, whenever you have a system that can perform multiple functions, you're a lot better off. So if you're thinking about having to redo your roof, slate, that should last for just about forever. As you saw on our existing sanctuary, that's original slate. There's been a couple of pieces that, got hit by hail or got cracked that we had to have repaired, but we've not had to replace the slate.
Bob, I really appreciated the way that you framed, the additional cost up front for LED lighting, more sustainable, lower energy use appliances, a high efficiency air conditioning system and stuff like that, in terms of who is going to pay for it if you don't, right? So the congregation is going to pay for it up front when you invest in those things, but the end result is you are not externalizing the negative impact on your neighbors, right? And so because you set up the conversation so beautifully that way, and talking about, like, if you are really loving your neighbor, you're not polluting their air. Right, one way we could think of that is the externalities of,
Yes.
Using inefficient systems in our buildings, right? So we know that corporations, they make their money because they don't have to pay for the externalities. But a faith community, if you're thinking along these lines and you can consider that and build that into your building renovation, that can be a way that you're exercising this deeper call. There was one other piece that I wanted to highlight too, which was, so it looked like you did this expansion, and even with the expansion, your gas costs were reduced by $3,000 in 1 year. And with your solar project, you extend it out for the lifetime of the panels. These are what the savings are going to be. I also just want to note, like, when folks are doing these projects, your 1 year savings, we have some certainties in life, right? Death, taxes, rising utility rates, right? And so if you're saving $3,000 in 1 year, right, you multiply that over time, but you also add, consistent utility rate increases to that. And so I just, so if you're looking at this, maybe $3,000 sounds like a kind of modest savings, but given that you did this big expansion and also multiplying that out over time, building in rate increases, that is a really significant dent in your gas usage.
Well, yeah, you're right. And we're actually talking about over a 25-year period, $75,000 here. And so what that equates to, and by the way we were able to achieve that, we thought we were going to need new boilers, because those are actually the original boilers that were put in 1917. They had been retrofitted in 1986, They're natural gas. They were retrofitted from coal to natural gas. In 1996, they replaced the burners in those. So we didn't have to replace the boilers themselves. What we did have to rework was the pumping system. And our contractor found, our church contractor does our maintenance, found a company in Toledo, Ohio that recognized the brand and said, yes, we can rebuild all your pumps for a fraction of the cost it would have been to replace those. Now, having said that, the reason I say that is in 25 years, that's going to need to be redone again. We don't have the cleanest water on the planet. Matter of fact, we treat our water with antioxidants twice a year that goes through that system because what comes in the water pipes is not pure. When I say not pure, I mean it has abrasives and contaminants in it. We put new filters in and drain capacity to clean those out. But you're right, they're going to have to be redone again. And so this money will pay for that in 25 years. And
This is, go ahead.
I just looked at the chat and I apologize. Were you able to, were the slides advancing eventually?
Yes.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Cyber squirrels, what are you going to do?
There is a message in the chat though from Robert who says, do you have plans to reduce natural gas use such as with geothermal? Also, do you track and report carbon emissions?
We just started using the EPA portfolio manager for tracking and benchmarking our usage and emissions. We do not have plans for geothermal, and this is, maybe we need to investigate this. I'm not real fond of geothermal, to be honest with you. What we learned when we were doing geothermal in residential projects was that we're not really saving any BTUs. The DTE was giving a reduced price per kilowatt hour for the electricity. So that's, people save money, but they didn't save electricity, if that makes any sense. So it's not my shtick, so I don't have any plans to look at it. I probably shouldn't be using contempt prior to investigation. That's been 6 or 7 years. It's probably time to look into that again. So thank you for that.
Great.
And I would encourage anyone who has any access, I mean, everyone can use the EPA's, the Environmental Protection Agency's portfolio manager to start tracking your utility usage. It's a valuable tool.
Excellent.
We have in the past helped a lot of congregations get started with it. And I think it's really good for those. Awesome. I think that's really good for those who have like a professional building manager or somebody who's really dedicated to using that. And it's a tool that has helped a bunch of Michigan congregations become Energy Star certified.
Yeah.
And I just want to brag a little bit that Michigan has more Energy Star certified congregations than any other state by a lot. Yeah.
Yourselves on the back. That's great. And we did get initially, we sent our utility bills over to Michigan IPL, and one of your staffers input all the information for us to get it started. So thank you for that.
Cool.
Great. These were great questions. Any other questions? Feel free to jump in. Otherwise, I will bring up my screen.
I would like to add one thing I didn't mention.
Sure.
I am on a track to be an ordained minister in the faith tradition, the United Methodist faith tradition.
Mhm.
I don't know about other faith traditions, but in the Methodist tradition, it's been pretty traditional that deacons need to find and execute their own ministry. And I am going to be focusing on an environmental and creation care social justice ministry. And we will, the conference will be hiring me out to other churches to help them with these issues as we get more grounded in it ourselves. So I've got another year at seminary, so I won't be doing a lot until then, but don't worry about the cost. We're going to develop some kind of a sliding fee base because we just all need to be doing this. And we got shot in the foot here with this pandemic. We had 2 churches that were already on board with hiring us to do workshops with them on sustainability and caring for creation. And one of them expected 25 people at the workshop, another one expected 35, and they both got canceled because they didn't want to try to do this online. So we're in a holding pattern right now, but the Methodist conference is going to be gearing up for this in a couple of years when I'm through with seminary.
Excellent. Looking forward for more on that. Pastor John.
Yeah, just a comment, Bob. There aren't a lot of people like you in our congregations. I think the Royal Oak Church is really blessed that you were part of them for this strategic moment. And I'm really pleased before I even got to say that you said you feel a calling that's going to be beyond a local parish thing, because the expertise, the background that you have is unfortunately pretty rare, I think, and for you to be able to be available to others that don't have people in their midst like you. So I'm just heartened. I guess I'm just grateful for what you just said tonight and what you guys are able to do. But it's partly, and big part is because, God put you in that place. So
That's right.
yeah, so I'm just kind of affirming
Not
not only what you've done, but what you're hoping to do. That's a great thing. And if you can just kind of get through this huge pause we're all in, right now, and trust that there's a brighter day ahead here. It's
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen. What a year. Well, I'm going to toot my horn one more time, and then I promise I'll shut up, Jennifer. But the goal with this ministry is not to be working as a consultant full-time for every church around the state, but to work with the local congregations and to help them bring up people within their own congregation that can then take the reins of this carriage and drive it, and then just be available to answer questions. Because I don't think I'm that rare. I have a rare voice, but I don't think it's a rare gift. It's just a matter of getting people to step up. A lot of people are afraid to talk about this still.
I have a comment, if that's okay. Yes, Energy Star has resources for the EPA. Energy Star has resources for congregations. It's called, they have a workbook that tells you how to get started in some of these things. And right now the Detroit 2030 district is working with our 6 or 7 houses of worship in doing a Energy Star treasure hunt, looking for ways to save money on energy in energy in their congregations right now. It's going to be a 6-month thing. It's a pilot with the EPA. They, like you said, for Michigan, that we have more Energy Star certified houses of worship than any other state. They're just ecstatic that we are so far ahead of everybody else. So we're doing this pilot with the EPA as a program that might spread across the country, actually. So I'll put a link to the Energy Star for congregations information. They have a workbook and checklists and things like that.
Thanks,
I've actually already done that, Peggy. It's linked on our resources webpage, and you can find that in the chat.
Awesome.
Thanks for piping in, Peggy, and for your involvement with the Detroit 2030 Houses of Worship. So, Bob, thank you so much. And then your contact information, is it okay if we share that out as part of the follow-up from this presentation?
Absolutely. Email, phone number, physical address, whatever. I want to be accessible.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay. We do, just before we close out, we do have a few other announcements. So Bob touched upon the utility rebates that they got from DTE, whoever utility provider is, and we realized that there are congregations present from all various parts of the state, but they all have various programs. We can work with you to access those rebates and incentives. You should be eligible for discounts if you do any kind of energy saving project, but please check first to see what those requirements are. Usually you do have to submit a pre-application. So again, please feel free to contact us and or drop into my office hours. So I have energy stewardship office hours every Tuesday, 3 to 4. I'd be delighted to see you. You can continue your energy savings journey in several different ways with Michigan IPL. One of them is an innovative program we designed in partnership with Consumers Energy called House of Worship Rewards, where you and your congregation get rewarded for congregants and your friends and family making energy saving improvements at home. So essentially involves signing up for a free home energy analysis offered by Consumers Energy. And depending upon the number of members and congregant friends and family that do, your congregation can earn up to $5,000. So please feel free to reach out about that. Again, my energy stewardship office hours every Tuesday. Love to see you, and you can email me anytime as well. Our next energy stewardship webinar in the series, we will be inviting Consumers Energy to meet with us to speak about the step-by-step process for applying for and receiving the rebates and how you can maximize the amount of incentives that your congregation is eligible for. So applying for rebates 101, that's on Tuesday, May 6th, 7 to 8 p.m. That link to register for that, along with a recording of this presentation, will be on our michiganipl.org/webinars webpage. And here's our contact information. We've been delighted to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.